Welcome to the G5 Hive in our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. Today, we'll be heading over to Conference USA to take a look at the 2024 Conference USA champions, the Jacksonville State Gamecocks, who are 10-3 in 2024. They capped off their season with a win in the New Orleans Bowl. They wrapped up their 2025 spring practice with their spring game on April 17th. We have a special guest joining us today. He is a Georgia native. He is a Jacksonville State and high school sports reporter for ALdotcom. He is a man who loves a good PB&J. He is Thomas Ashworth. Thomas can be found on X at _Thomas Ashworth. Welcome to the show, Thomas.
How you doing, man? I need you to do like my introductions for when I walk into a room or something. Like that was pretty good.
I got to start off strong. Wake up, everybody! This will come out early in the morning. We got to make sure we get everybody up and ready to get excited for some Gamecock football talk.
Of course.
But before we get into the football, for those just tuning into the G5 Hive for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how long you've been covering Jacksonville State football?
Yeah, so my name is Thomas. I work for ALdotcom. I used to work for the Anderson Star, a little bit closer to Jacksonville. I still covered the team then. That was about a year ago. Just got a new job kind of doing a little bit of the same stuff as far as Jacksonville State is concerned with ALdotcom. So and then went to school there. So been around the team probably 4 or 5 years now. Seen 3 different head coaches. This is the third one. So a lot's different now, but obviously some of it's in a good way with all the winning and all the FBS transition. So a little bit different than when I started for sure, but obviously we got a lot to talk about just because it's a brand new transition this year.
Well, speaking of a transition, the Gamecocks have hired Charles Kelly as their new head coach. Coach Kelly came to Jacksonville via Auburn, where he was a co-defensive coordinator and safeties coach. In 2023, he was the defensive coordinator and safeties coach at Colorado. And from 2019 through 2022, he was the assistant defensive coordinator and safeties coach at Alabama. What can you tell us about Coach Kelly and what he brings to the table for the Gamecocks?
Yeah, I'll first talk a little bit about Rich Rod. I mean, obviously he was kind of the guy that they knew was going to be the transition piece to the FBS level. I mean, they needed a guy who they knew could win, they knew could build a program, they knew could maintain a program. And he was that guy. I mean, I think that him staying there for 3 years, as long as he did, was really, kind of I think that stretched a little bit. I thought that he might stay 2 seasons, but 3 seasons was good for him. I think, and good for Jacksonville State, obviously being able to win a conference championship. But when you look at, Charles Kelly, I think that you can kind of see shades of what they did in the past in the sense of they wanted a guy who is a Jacksonville State head coach. And what I mean by that is they want a guy who's a hometown guy. He knows the state really well. Everybody is familiar with him. And he's the kind of guy that obviously Rich Rod was a guy who everybody knows, but Charles Kelly is a guy that he's going to hit up the high schools and he's going to take, I don't want to say Rich Rod didn't do this stuff, but Charles Kelly is going to be more intentional, I guess, with the sense of, I know the state. I know I was here, he's from Ozark. He was at Auburn. He was at Alabama. He got to start at Central Phoenix City, right? Down south in Alabama. He knows the state at a deeper level than maybe Rich Rod was even able to, just because he's not from here. And I don't know if he had a stint there, but Coach Kelly's a guy that knows the state, and he's able to do that. And I think that's kind of what Jacksonville State wanted to do, based on what it looked like they were interviewing people for, was they wanted somebody with deep ties to the state who is really able to identify, this is where I need to go. These are the players. These are the best areas for football, that kind of stuff. So he's that kind of guy. And that's what I mean when I say he's a Jacksonville State head coach.
As it often happens when you have a new head coach, that means new assistants, coordinators. Jacksonville State's no different in this regard, as Coach Kelly has brought in Clint Trickett. Coach Trickett comes in via Georgia Southern, where he serves as the tight end coach and passing game coordinator. From 2021 through 2023, he was at Marshall. In 2021, he served as a wide receivers and passing game coordinator. And in 2022, 2023, he was the OC and quarterbacks coach. Can you describe the type of offense that Coach Trickett plans to run there at Jacksonville State?
Yeah, it's obviously going to be a little different than Rich Rod, as far as it's probably not going to be as much run it down your throat. Our guys are going to get 100 yard or carries a game, that kind of thing, which obviously I think Rich Rod's obviously at the extreme end of that. But I mean, Clint Trickett's obviously a guy, and you can kind of tell by the makeup of this roster is that they're going to be able to actually mix it up this year a little bit more so than maybe in the past. I'm not saying, Rich Rod didn't throw the ball, but it's obvious that's not really his thing and what he's known for. But, when you're talking about a Clint Trickett offense, it's a little bit of everything. I don't, want to say that it's not one or the other because it's a little bit of both, and they certainly have the personnel for that, but they're definitely going to throw the ball a little more. And I think that the quarterbacks that they have in that room kind of show that. I mean, they have some guys who can run a little bit, but it's more so they want to get the ball in the air, and they've done a really good job, I think, of not only retaining receivers, but kind of filling in the holes of what they need in the receiver room and in the tight end room. So they're definitely going to be throwing the ball probably a little bit more. I say that with sarcasm, a little bit more than maybe under a traditional Rich Rod offense that they've seen for the last 3 years.
Well, let's start with the group that leads this Gamecock offense, the quarterbacks. Last year, Tyler Huff had a huge year, so much so he was first team all-conference. Huff threw for 2,519 yards and 14 touchdowns. He added 1,452 yards and 15 touchdowns on the ground. Well, Huff has graduated, and the other QBs who took a snap for the Gamecocks have moved on. This staff brings in Gavin Wimsatt from Kentucky and Cade Cunningham from Memphis. So you kind of have a new QB room. You have a new coaching staff. Thomas, what can we, expect from this quarterback room heading into 2025?
Yeah, for all intents and purposes, right now, Gavin is the starting quarterback for Jacksonville State. If they played a game right now, whenever you're listening to this podcast, Gavin Wimsatt would be the quarterback for Jacksonville State. He's a guy that Coach Kelly saw last year when Kentucky played Auburn. And I don't think that he had the Jacksonville State job on his mind then, but he said, this is a pretty good quarterback. And, I think that they saw that obviously his stats don't show that, but, his abilities to run, his ability to throw the ball. But it's obviously a little bit different when you're the backup at an SEC school. But when he came to Jacksonville State, I think that he just kind of was looking for a year to get a really good season under his belt and kind of have that opportunity under somebody who he can trust and can trust him. And I think that Clint Trickett really likes him. And I think Charles Kelly really likes him. Obviously he's on the roster, but I think they liked him from the start in that sense. And I mean, just kind of looking at him in camp, I mean, I think people have been impressed by him, maybe not more so than they expected, but they've been impressed by him, and it's been really good for him. I think in camp, for the little bit that I saw him, I think that he had a really good poise about him. He could throw the ball. I think he mixed really well with the receivers that Jacksonville State is returning and is getting back. They have a lot of potential in that offense, and I think at the quarterback position they really passed the eye test as far as the group of five is concerned, in my opinion.
Sure. When I think about Gavin Wimsatt, I think of a dual threat. Not necessarily the dual threat in the sense of like a Tyler Huff, but someone that I feel like, 500-600 yards is probably in the cards. But I'm really kind of interested in your thoughts about Wimsatt and how would you describe his game?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I think Tyler Huff's a little bit on the extreme end. Right now, I think he's playing like indoor football, and he ran for 3 touchdowns in a game or something like that. Like he's kind of that bruiser that isn't really afraid of anything. I think he's kind of on that 99th percentile when it comes to running the football and that kind of stuff. But I do think Gavin is a guy that if you're on the 2 and you want to score, I think that he can get it done, and you have complete confidence in that. Like you said, he can certainly run the ball. He's shown that. But I do think that when you get to the group of 5 level, it's going to be a little bit of a different game. But I do think that these receivers give him that ability to be able to kind of work in. And it's always going to be tough under a new system. But like I said, I keep talking about these receivers, but they're an experienced group, and that is half the battle. I mean, they have guys that have been in the system for a long time. One guy who's been in there for like 100 years, and then they have some guys who are coming in that are a little bit different and can mix it up. But I do think that Gavin passed the eye test for me. He's certainly talented. People are looking at him to have a really big year at the quarterback position. I think that he can throw it, he can get it done on the ground. And like I said, I mean, I haven't gotten too much eyes on him personally, just because one, he was injured during the spring game, so we didn't really get to see him truly in action. But the one time I saw him, he was very poised. I think people in the building are very impressed, and we'll see what happens with that group.
Is there anyone that kind of stood out maybe as like the number two, behind Gavin?
Yeah, Cade Cunningham, like you said, he's a guy that he played in the spring game, and I thought he had some really good moments. I think that he is a guy who's going to throw it more. He's obviously had that group of 5 pedigree. He's a guy that's been around a little bit. And then they have guys behind him as well. I mean, Caden Creel has been in the system for a little while. He's from Fairhope. He's right, he's kind of by the beach. If you want to split up the sections in Alabama, he's closer to the beach. But he is from Alabama. And then they got a guy, Jack Moran. He's a freshman. He won Gatorade Player of the Year in New Jersey. And he was kind of he wasn't, I don't think he was really on the Rich Rod radar, but when the new coaching staff came in, I think that he had that prior relationship with Clint Trickett maybe, or it was started one way or another, but they really meshed together, him and Clint Trickett. And, one thing led to another, and he decommitted from Charlotte, picked between Jack State, Florida Atlantic, and landed at Jack State. But he's a high volume passer. He could throw the ball. He threw for a ton of yards in New Jersey, and he can get it done in the air. So I do think that, right now, for all intents and purposes, it's Gavin. But if you're looking at the backups, I think that there's plenty of options there, and there's some guys who can probably grow in that regard. I mean, Jack, and they have some other quarterbacks that are coming in as freshmen in 2026. So, the cupboard's not empty, even though a lot of those guys left last year. So we'll see how that goes with the backups and kind of what the order is there.
Well, moving over to the running back room, last year we were talking about the group losing a fair amount of production, and we were talking about Ron Wiggins coming back from the portal, as he was briefly in there and then came back. Well, I think this room performed just fine in the rushing department in 2024. Wiggins only got 9 snaps, and he's graduated, but the big loss was first-team all-conference running back Trey Stewart. Stewart ran for 1,662 yards and 25 touchdowns last season. Georgia transfer Andrew Paul is back, but he is only back. But he's the only back that returns in 2025 from the 2024 team, or that took a snap. This staff only brought in 1 transfer, and that was Cam Cook from TCU. Thomas, how did this room look in the spring?
I mean, just kind of looking at the spring game, I think Cam Cook had a really good performance in that game. I mean, he showed that he's a workhorse. I mean, I asked him kind of, what's your game? I think that his answer was, I'm going to score. And that's kind of obviously the mentality you have. But I mean, he's a speedster. He can really just burn people if you're, within a couple of yards of him. He can burn you pretty good. He can get in the end zone if he's 1 yard out. I think that he kind of brings that versatility of speed and power that somebody, it's obviously going to help a lot when you get to the group of 5 level, and you can really kind of set yourself apart in that regard. But Cam Cook, I think, would be the lead back right now, just based on the eye test. I think Andrew Paul had his moments last year. He is certainly capable of scoring, and I think that if he stayed at Georgia, he might have gotten a couple of snaps. But he's a guy that's going to look to kind of lead that running back room as well. And, I mean, he knows the system very well as well. So that, as far as, the guys that are in that room, he knows the wide receivers, he knows the offensive linemen. So that'll certainly help. But they have a lot of young guys who were kind of, I think they were true freshmen last year. Justice Savage, Christian Lando are a couple of the names that are coming to mind. Justice was a guy who was a big flip on signing day for Jacksonville State. I think he was originally committed to Indiana, and he flipped to Jacksonville State on signing day to play for Rich Rod, but he stuck around in that administration with Coach Kelly. I think that he could certainly be a factor in this game as well. There's a lot of guys who were younger last year, and you thought that they were going to kind of have their moments, but it was just such a dominant year from Trey Stewart and all the guys. He had a couple of guys around him that did really well as well. So they didn't really get their shot, but this year, I mean, they could certainly be a factor behind Cam Cook.
So you mentioned, Cam Cook has the ability to be a bell cow, but how does the staff want to utilize the running back? You got a new staff. Do they want to use the bell cow, or do they want to deploy more of a committee approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Coach Kelly, it's going to be a little bit different than maybe the Rich Rod effect of this guy isn't doing well, we're going to put another guy in and then we're going to cycle it out until it works. It might be a little different there, but I think that you look at last year was kind of a little bit of a different example. I mean, you look at the season before, it was a little bit more. They split up the yards in a running back by committee. With Malik Jackson and Anwar Lewis and Ron Wiggins, they've had that in the past. And then this last year, they just kind of found their guy. And when you have a guy who can run and be an All-American type player, and now he's with the Minnesota Vikings as an undrafted free agent. I mean, when you have that kind of guy, it's going to be a little bit tough to let him go and, kind of go back to that. But no, I mean, I think that they certainly have the ability to mix it up. I can't really speak for too much just because it was Coach Kelly was coming in December and then the spring game was in April. So it's a little bit different, but I do think that they certainly have the ability to mix it up. They have the talent. I think that Andrew Paul should certainly get some snaps this year, but I do think Cam Cook might surprise a lot of people. I mean, I think that he was in a little bit of a tougher situation at TCU just with what was around him. And I think coming to Jacksonville State will certainly be able to give him an opportunity to not only, he can be the bell cow, he could kind of be in that piece of running back by committee, but like you said, I mean, I guess we'll see how game one goes and just go from there.
You mentioned like a couple other of these running backs. I'm kind of curious if we happen to see some of them rotate in there. You got Andrew Paul, you got Justice Savage, you got Christian Lando that you talked about. How would you describe like each of their skill sets?
It's tough for me. I mean, like I said, most of the guys that we saw last year are gone. But you do know that there is talent in that room, and they were guys that were originally recruited by Rod McDowell, who's, I think, one of the better running back coaches in the group of five as far as he's able to get with his players. He understands that, it's high IQ players that make the difference. And these guys are really smart. I think that both of them came from Georgia, and they came from very successful programs in Georgia as kind of those leaders. But it's I do think that, they have the ability to do that from what I've seen, in drills and everything. Justice is one of the guys that kind of stood out as snap. They got him. I think he's 5'10", 205 pounds. So take with that what you want as far as his power and all that stuff. But his speed is certainly a factor as well. So, I can't speak too much to those freshman guys just because I haven't seen them too much. But I know that there is talent in that young group, and, they will get some shots this year.
Let's turn our attention over to the wide receivers. And by way of graduation or the portal, this group sees 8 of them depart. The biggest loss has to be Cam Vaughn, who led this team in targets, receptions, yards, and touchdowns a year ago. He followed Rich Rod over to West Virginia. This room does bring back 2 guys who saw some action in 2024, one of which is Michael Petway. He was second on the team in all those categories I mentioned earlier. What are the expectations for these wide receivers here in 2025?
I think that Coach Kelly really benefited from this wide receiver group in the sense of a lot of them have been at Jacksonville State or a couple of them have been at Jacksonville State since the 2 head coaches ago. And Michael Petway is a guy, this is his 7th season of college football. I'm pretty sure they call him grandpa around the facility. He's just a guy who's, how are you still here? But he is still here. He's had some medical red shirts between that, COVID, and he took his first freshman season as a red shirt at Washington State, transferred to Jacksonville State in the COVID spring season for FCS, and then he stuck with the team ever since. So he's a guy that obviously understands Jacksonville State. He understands the culture, and he understands how a lot of these guys work. And Brock Rechsteiner is a guy. Brock Rechsteiner is a guy who he was originally recruited by the John Gross head coaching staff and those guys. And then Rich Rod obviously came on, and he's stuck around since then. And he's a guy who stepped up last year, as I think he finished 3rd or 4th in receiving for Jacksonville State last year. So he's a guy that is able to, kind of understand the system. Pearson Baldwin's a guy, he's a tight end, but he's been around for 4 or 5 years now. He's been in the system a long time. So I think that receiver group of guys that are veterans, they understand the system. They've been around a lot of these guys together for a while. That's certainly something that's going to help kind of in the locker room, specifically when it comes to new staff and turnover and not a lot of familiar faces in the offices. So, but no, those guys will certainly look to lead this year, specifically when you're talking about transitioning to offense that is a little bit more wide receiver friendly than maybe in the past with, an all-conference running back in Trey Stewart and a guy who can run the ball pretty well in Tyler Huff. So I'm sure they're excited to catch some passes.
You mentioned Rechsteiner, and for those that may not know, those listeners that may not know, he's the son of Big Papa Pump, Scott Steiner, the professional wrestler. Was there anybody that kind of stood out to you this spring that maybe had a good connection with Gavin, or that someone that he targeted heavily? Or
a guy that's new to the system that I think will be a little bit of a factor is DeAndre Johnson, and he was from Rutgers. You'll hear why he's going to be a factor. He's 6'8", so that's a pretty big dude. He's certainly going to be a guy that's going to be an end zone target in one way or another for Jacksonville State. I do think that they brought him in for a reason, and that reason may just be because he's 6'8", but he certainly has the ability, and I think that he was very impressive in the limited time that I saw him. But I mean, these guys, Michael Petway, Brock Rechsteiner, those guys are kind of going to be your bread and butter when it comes to. I'm looking at the roster right here just so I don't forget anybody, but those guys are going to be the ones that are certainly going to be the leaders in that group, probably going to see the field most of the time, more often than not. But I think that that's going to be a benefit for Jacksonville State. I really do. Jordan McCants was a guy that I thought would be a factor, but he transferred to West Virginia as well. He's a guy that had been there a little while, but they still have some pieces in that wide receiver room. I'm sure that there are still going to be maybe a few trickle in. As far as these are going to be some guys that pop up that they're on the roster right now, but those are kind of going to be the guys that you're going to look for when it comes to catching the ball this fall.
You lose Cam Vaughn, who's kind of the wide receiver one a year ago. Obviously, it's a new offense. Do you see someone kind of stepping up, and is it Petway that kind of assumes that wide receiver one role, or do you think that the goal of the staff is to kind of spread the ball more evenly amongst 3 or 4 receivers?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for in the building, but I do think that Petway would be the guy that would be the wide receiver one role. I mean, he's held that in one way or another, and in some ways with the team. I mean, he's a guy that was an all-conference returner not too long ago during when Jack State was in the ASUN conference. He's a guy that's capable. He's been Jack State's leading receiver, and he was the leading receiver in multiple games last year. So he certainly has the ability to be wide receiver one. I think he's been that before. But if you're going to pinpoint one, I think that the clear answer 9 times out of 10 would be him for sure.
Well, Thomas, with the coaching change, what have you been able to learn in terms of how the tight ends will be utilized in this offense?
I think that they have a good coach in Taylor Housewright. I think that they got a good guy in him. It's a little bit different for me just because I haven't seen much of these guys. When you're talking about it, it's a totally new room. They lose a guy who is a all-conference guy. I don't know if he was on there or not, but he should have been. If he wasn't, Sean Brown, who Rich Rod said was one of the best blocking tight ends he's ever coached. What's his name? Jacob Barrick, that's his name. He followed Rich Rod over to West Virginia. So there's some guys that are going to step up. Pearson Baldwin is a guy who I saw in spring a lot 2 years ago, there was a period where they had some injuries to the tight end room. So Pearson Baldwin stepped in, and I think that was his sophomore year, I guess. And he was pretty impressive in the limited time that I saw him. He certainly had a few really good runs. He can catch the ball. I do think that I think he's very skilled in the passing game, but as far as the blocking game, I think that you're going to have some new faces. I think Harrison Hamsley is his name. He transferred from ALdotcom State. He's a guy that I don't know too much about, but I know that he came in for a reason, and ALdotcom State's certainly a team that has had really good success at their level. But it's a totally different tight end room, which is a little bit different just because Jack State's had the same tight ends kind of year in and year out. A few years ago, it was Trey Berry. This year, it was Sean Brown, as it was for the last 3 years. So it's going to be a little bit different for that team, kind of having a new face in the tight end room. But Pearson Baldwin's a guy that's been in the program for a long time, and he can catch the ball and be a factor in the receiving game.
Well, I guess I'm kind of curious about this, pass catching abilities versus blocking. You had Sean Brown last year with just 17 targets. I mean, they definitely were a run happy team last year. Do you anticipate more than 17 targets for whoever that tight end one is?
I mean, for sure. I think that, you look at Rich Rod. I mean, Sean Brown was probably one of the best blocking tight ends in the country last year. In my opinion, just watching him. And there are guys that, there were times that they had 2 or 3 tight ends on the field. It felt like blocking for Trey Stewart, kind of giving him a lane. So, I mean, I think that Rich Rod was almost on the extreme in the sense of he wanted to play the tight ends. He wanted them to block. He wanted them to, have routes. And they had a guy, Michael Nicewinder on their roster who was a force in the blocking game at Alabama at fullback. So, I think that they were able to learn a lot from him as far as the blocking game. But this year, I mean, I think that the personnel certainly makes up for a pass-friendly tight end room. But I mean, it's funny when you talk about this just because you're comparing it to, if the extreme is here, it's right here next to it as far as utilizing the tight ends for the running game. But I mean, I wouldn't be shocked at all if the tight ends did catch some passes, just because I think that Pearson Baldwin's certainly capable. I think he's grown over the last 2 years as far as leadership, whether he likes it or not, just because he's been in the program for a long time. And that's the kind of guy that Charles Kelly's going to turn to. So I think that he'll certainly get some opportunities, and he's certainly capable of catching the ball and making some plays.
Well, the Gamecocks will look to fill some holes on this offensive line in 2025, especially on the left side. First-team all-conference left tackle Will Osteen is off to North Carolina. Their other first-team all-conference lineman graduated in left guard Clay Webb. Another loss to graduation was center Brock Roby. However, he only played 5 games before he was hurt and missed the rest of the season. So Davion Harley took over for him, and then he took off to Cal after the spring. It looks like this 2025 team will be anchored by right guard Amari Grayson. Thomas, I'm a little bit nervous about this offensive line. Obviously, Harley was there in the spring. He's gone now. What are your thoughts and expectations heading into fall camp?
Yeah, this is a position group that I don't know what to tell you as far as I don't know this group very well and how it's going to shape out. I mean, you lose 2 guys after spring. One of them goes to North Carolina and one of them goes to Cal. I mean, it's like, it's crazy to me that it's just going to be a completely different group than I saw. So I really don't know too much about this group. I know that they got some transfers, and Adrian Gum is a guy from Tusculum. He's a big dude, and he's going to transfer, and I'm sure that he'll make a difference. I'm sure they've gotten some other offensive linemen that I'm completely blanking on at the moment. But I do know that they have one of the best offensive line coaches in the country in Rick Trickett. I mean, he's a guy that, he's kind of the mogul when it comes to that stuff. So he knows what he wants and he knows what he's after. But I mean, this is a group that's going to look completely different than, even 2 years ago. I mean, it's like that. It seems like the whole unit's just completely turned on its head. It's completely different. But I really don't know too much about this group just because 2 of the guys that we saw so much consistently in spring and we saw in the spring game that were going to be leaders are gone. So it's tough. And I mean, like you said, it's going to be interesting to see who fills those holes and who steps up and luckily they have some guys that can block, like that can block in the tight end room, and those guys that kind of know what's going on. But no, it's going to be completely different. And I think that some of those problems were solved by the portal. They were able to plug some holes there. But it's tough when your guys leave in spring, especially after the spring game, and it never will not be tough when that happens. So we'll see what happens with that offensive line group. I mean, I certainly don't know too much about who's going to step in where, and who's going to be able to fill those holes right now.
Well, one guy that I feel like at least we know something about, and that's Amari Grayson. And it sounds to me, it sounds weird to say this because I'm pretty sure he was a true freshman last year, or maybe he was a redshirt freshman, but he might be like the elder statesman. But you got to be encouraged with him coming back, right? Someone that they can kind of build upon for this offensive line.
Yeah, he was a all freshman team pick last year, and in the conference at least. And I mean, he had a good year as far as he stepped in, he did his job. And when you look at Trey Stewart and the numbers he had, it's kind of hard to argue if the offense, it's kind of tough to pinpoint struggles in the offensive line when it comes to that kind of performance for that guy and Tyler Huff. But I mean, it's a guy, like you said, he understands kind of what Rick Trickett's about. He understands the coaching mentality. I mean, I think that's the only coaching staff retaining coach that stuck around when Rich Rod left is Coach Trickett. But he's able to kind of understand that coaching. And, obviously there are guys that are coming back. Dalen Martin, I think is his name. He's a guy that was on the roster last year. He was injured some of last year, I think, is my understanding. He could be a factor as far as returners, but some of these problems will just have to be solved by the portal. I mean, like I said, Gum's a guy that could step in. He was a big guy, but yeah, it looks like that's going to be he's going to be a factor, and he'll probably have to step up maybe more than he anticipated a couple of months ago, just because of the guys that left.
All right, Thomas, if you were to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who you got?
Yeah, it's tough just because, I mean, you don't really, know some of these guys, but it's if you're talking about breakout as far as they're a guy that could be an all-conference player, I do really think that Gavin Wimsatt's a guy, and that's kind of a cop-out answer, and I'll give you a better one, I'm sure. But I do think that he's a guy that maybe some people are like, oh, his stats weren't all too good last year or that kind of stuff. He won't really amount to much, but he really did look the part in spring. I think that people were really impressed by him, and not only that, but his character and kind of his work ethic. And he played recruiter a little bit in getting some guys on visits. And I mean, he made his presence known on campus. I know he was at a few basketball games, but as far as the off the field stuff is concerned, I think that's kind of what's really impressed a lot of people. But on the field is the same way. I do think that Pearson Baldwin is certainly a breakout candidate for me when it comes to guys who haven't seen a lot of action. I know he played special teams primarily last year, but I do think that he's going to be able to step up into that tight end role. I mean, kind of what I saw a couple of years ago in practice. I mean, he's capable of making lanes. He's capable of catching the ball. He's capable of a few things. And he actually played quarterback in high school about an hour down the road at Springville High School near Birmingham. So he's a guy that understands the offense, and he maybe can see it in a different way. But he would be kind of my breakout candidate as far as, this is a guy that didn't play much last year. He hasn't played much, but he's been in the system a long time. And he understands, and he's done a lot of growth since then. So if I had to pick one guy, that would be my guy.
All right, let's move over to the defense. And just like the offensive side of the ball, there's a new coach. Brian Williams comes in via Maryland. He had been at Maryland since 2019. He was the co-defensive coordinator and defensive line coach in 2021. And from 2022 to 2023, he dropped the co and was the defensive coordinator and defensive line coach. Can you kind of describe the defensive scheme that Williams plans to run here at Jacksonville State?
Yeah, I was originally, we were all familiar, or I was at least familiar with Vinny Sunseri. I was expecting him to come in and kind of be that guy. And I was told he's not going to stay around long just because he's such a great mind and he's really smart and a lot of people like him. And then I think that he was on campus for 3 weeks before he became the assistant defensive coordinator of Florida. So or linebackers coach, whatever it is. But he is at Florida now. A little bit step up from Jacksonville State to the SEC. But I mean, that's life-changing monies, and good for him. But this guy, I mean, he's been he's been there at the Power 5 level. I mean, you can kind of see what he did at Maryland. I think that he had some better groups than some people might like to give him credit for at Maryland. I mean, he did a good job there, and certainly in some seasons. I think that he's kind of like Charles Kelly in a way of he's able to kind of connect with recruits. I think that's really a skill set of this staff specifically, him specifically, is that he's able to connect with these recruits. But when you look at, I mean, defensive scheme, I mean, during the spring game, I mean, he really wasn't there that long during the spring game. I mean, I don't know how long it was from when he was hired to the spring game, but it certainly wasn't long. And, I'm sure it was a little bit of a shift for some of these players to, go from one defensive coordinator to the next one within a month or two. So it's a little bit tough to kind of pinpoint specifically what he's looking to bring to Jacksonville State, but I mean, he certainly had success at Maryland in what he did and what he's probably going to bring to Jacksonville State. But it's a lot different personnel too. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
Well, let's dig into the position room and start with the guys up front along the defensive line. The line graduates J-Rock Swain on the edge and Ricky Samuel and Dylan Brown on the interior. This line will feature Juwan Campbell, Daryl Prater, and Talon Carter. The room looks deep at edge, but I have some questions in the middle. How do you feel about this group heading into the summer?
Yeah, like you said, Daryl Prater is a guy that's been around. He was a really good player last year for Jacksonville State as far as a leader. I asked Coach Kelly kind of who's going to be kind of your leaders this year, and he said that Daryl's a guy that stepped up, has done really good. So these are guys that are veterans. Like you said, there is depth at defensive line, and I think that they got some guys in the portal that will be helpful, but there is definitely returning depth at defensive line, and that's kind of I don't want to say surprising just because those guys were good, but when you lose a franchise guy like J-Rock Swain, who's been in the program for so long and holds records at Jacksonville State, it's kind of tough, and I'm sure it can be tough, but with these guys, I think that they'll do fine. I think that might be a strength of the defense as far as returning production, but on the edge, it's going to be like you said, it's going to be a little bit different. Who's going to be getting to the quarterback primarily. I mean, there are some guys there. I think you look at some of the defensive linemen as far as where they gonna go. But Juwan Campbell's a guy that's he's also been a mainstay on the defensive line. He was very good last year. I thought he is only a sophomore, which impressed me. But he's going to be a guy that's going to step up. And they may go different places. I mean, I don't know what this defensive line is going to look like just because J-Rock Swain isn't there. But Daryl Prater, like you said, Talon Carter, Juwan Campbell are all guys that can do some stuff on the defensive line in a variety of ways, like we saw last year. But that's a good group right there. I think of three that you can kind of depend on and you can look to, specifically with Campbell and the way that he kind of stepped up last year.
J-Rock Swain led the defensive line and was second on the team in pressures with 22 in 2024. Who will the staff look to in order to create that pressure here in 2025?
I do think that Juwan Campbell is, like you said, he's a guy. I mean, I'm sure that he was up there as well as far as pressures and being able to get to the quarterback. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but he is a guy that can create some pressure, and I think that would be maybe the guy that you look to. But like I said, Daryl Prater's a guy that is a mainstay on that defensive line and in that locker room. I mean, he can certainly be an anchor when you need him to be. He's a steady presence. I think that he'll bring that this year. I also think that Curtis Perry's a guy that he was originally on Charles Kelly's radar when he was coming out of high school at Pike Road High School. I can't believe I haven't even mentioned him, but he's a guy that transferred in. He was at Virginia Tech last year, and I know that he's come in and he's gotten right to work. as far as the culture, and he's really gotten keyed in with the guys, and from what I've heard. So he's going to be a guy that's going to be his presence on that defensive line. He was probably one of the best as far as people are like, wow, this guy's really good. He was probably one of the best high school players in Alabama coming out of Pike Road, and went to Alabama, just couldn't really find a spot. And then now he's at Jacksonville State with Charles Kelly, who loved him out of high school and thinks a lot of him now. So the defensive line, he'll certainly be a factor on that defensive line just because of the talent that he has and just the ability that he has. And but he's going to be a presence, and I think that he'll certainly help in some pressure on defense.
Well, moving over to the linebacking group, they lose several key members via the portal or graduation. Probably no bigger loss than first-team all-conference linebacker Reginald Hughes, who's off to Colorado. He led this team in pressures with 29 and sacks with 6 last season. This 2025 team has a handful of guys returning from 2024, but none of the returnees averaged more than 12 snaps per game. The room looks very green as in terms of experience as we head into 2025. I'm kind of curious about your thoughts, Thomas.
Yeah, like you said, it's different. It's there's a lot of guys that are going to have to step up for Jacksonville State. One guy that I would look at, he was here last year, Morven Joseph. He transferred from Florida Atlantic last year. I'm sure that he's going to be able to bring some pressure at the linebacker position. He was, he had some time last year, but I think that he'll be able to get a better opportunity this year. There's some other guys that are transferring in. Jacob Cruz is a guy from Georgia Tech. He transfers in with another staffer who came in from Georgia Tech. And I think that he'll be able to certainly make some noise. Miles Butler's a guy who was kind of coming up to FBS. He had a few plays at Campbellsville University. Just kind of going down the list here. Why not? But yeah, there's a few guys who could certainly make some noise at the linebacker position. But it's a new group, like you said. There's a lot of questions with that group. For me, as far as who's going to be the guy who's going to step up. But Reginald Hughes, like you said, was great last year for Jacksonville State and just what they needed. Now at Colorado with Deion Sanders. But like you said, it's a green room as well, like there is with a lot of the defense. Charles Kelly certainly had some work to do, but I do think there's going to be some guys that step up. It's just going to be a matter of who's going to get the tackles, who's going to be the guy that creates some pressure, who's going to be the guy that gets the tackles for loss for Jack State next season.
Well, the secondary took big hits in the offseason. Safety Antonio Carter, the second, has graduated. And the room sees 6 others who played a significant amount of snaps hit the portal. Another devastating loss is none other than first-team all-conference safety Fred Perry, who is off to, you guessed it, West Virginia. The room has guys coming back, but they lack this game action similar to that linebacking room. Given the losses in this room, what should we expect from the secondary in 2025?
It's going to be interesting to see kind of how they perform. They're really reliant on transfers just because so many guys left, either whether it was to West Virginia with Rich Rod or elsewhere, graduation or what have you. It's just a completely new room. One of the transfers that's really stepped up is Rod Elson. He's a guy that went to high school right down the road from Jacksonville State in Calhoun County, and he played a little bit. He was at Auburn last year. He was on the roster there under Charles Kelly on that defense. And I know he's stepped up and he's been a really good leader for that team. And he played pretty well in the spring game as well. I think that he was really good. They landed a guy, Traquan Fagans is another name that I think could certainly be a factor. He was originally recruited to Alabama and then just kind of bounced around. He was at USC, UCF, and then he grew up in Anniston right down the road, but he's at Jacksonville State now. He's a guy that transferred in that could certainly be a factor for Jacksonville State. But like you said, it's going to be interesting to see kind of who steps up, who's going to be the guy in the defensive back room, whether it be cornerback or safety. they got absolutely just depleted. Just so many really talented players. There's some other guys. I mean, Larry Preston's a guy from Murray State. Tyron Taylor's a guy from Memphis. Those could be guys that could step into positions that Jacksonville State certainly needs. But I do know Charles Kelly saw when he came in that he needed improvement for the defensive backs. And I know that he said that this was a group that he thought progressed really well when it came to he got there to the spring game. So I know that he was really impressed with just the way that group was able to grow specifically when it came to day one to spring game. But there's certainly a lot of questions there, and it'll be interesting to see how Coach Kelly and company answer them.
Now, replacing first-team all-conference player in Perry is difficult, and I'm not going to say that there's somebody who's going to be a one-for-one replacement. I think that's not those aren't realistic expectations. But if there's somebody that you feel is up for the challenge to fill Perry's shoes in 2025, who is it?
Yeah, it's tough just because, I mean, you look at just kind of me watching what Fred Perry did. I mean, he was a guy that could get out it in coverage. He was a guy that if you needed him to, he could come down and get after the quarterback if you need him. He was just all over the field. Like, it was ridiculous sometimes just how much he was in two places at once, almost it felt like, for Jacksonville State. A really talented player that West Virginia's gotten. But like you said, I mean, it's tough to pinpoint. That Patrick Taylor's a guy that says he can go both ways. I think he was a transfer from Georgia last year. He's still on the team as far as I'm concerned under Coach Kelly, and he could certainly be a presence. He's a veteran guy who saw some time last year. I think he was the leading tackler in a few games last year, but just kind of saw a drop off in production a little bit, but he should be back and be a good presence in that line. I do think Rod Elson's a guy that they like I mentioned, they're going to turn to. He understands not just Coach Kelly, but I mean, he kind of understands what Coach Kelly's going to ask him to do. He understands that what defensive ideas he might have. So that's going to be a guy that could potentially get some looks as well as a guy that, may not be, first team all conference pick in his first year, but he'll certainly be a steady presence. And who knows, he certainly has the potential to be a first team all conference pick. But it's just tough whenever you're talking about a completely new room, a completely new staff, just guys who are just coming together through the portal. It's never easy. But that group I know has progressed a lot, but there's certainly a lot of guys in that room that could certainly fill those spots. It'll just be kind of a matter who they are on, the first game of the season.
All right, Thomas, if you were to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who would that be?
I do like the idea of Curtis Perry coming in and making some noise for Jacksonville State. He's been a guy that has, like I said, he was one of the most talented defensive players probably in the state of Alabama out of high school at Pike Road. Just hasn't really been able to kind of find a place, but Jacksonville State could certainly provide that for him. I know that Coach Kelly has liked him a long time. He's been very impressed with him, and he brings a lot to Jacksonville State on that defensive line. I think that he'll be a steady presence there. As far as the linebacker room, I do think Morven Joseph's a guy that you can look to have a good year. I think that he's the veteran presence that Jacksonville State might need in that linebacker room, and I know he stepped up as a leader for Jacksonville State as well. But those are two guys that I think could, make some noise on a defense that had a ton of turnover just because of the coaching change, graduation, the transfer portal, all that stuff combined. Just it's going to be interesting to see who really truly steps up as the leader of that defense, just because there are so many variables when it comes to who's going to play where, who's going to step up with these veterans gone. And, just between all of that, it's going to be interesting to see who lines up against UCF for sure.
Well, we've talked about the offense. We've talked about the defense. Now let's head over to the special teams. How are those units looking, and are there any concerns heading into the summer?
Well, Garrison Ripa is coming back for Jacksonville State. He's the guy that 2 years ago, if he had the infamous bowl kick in the New Orleans Bowl as a freshman to win Jacksonville State its first bowl game in the New Orleans Bowl against Louisiana. He was the kicker this season. I think he was an all-conference freshman pick this year at Jacksonville State on kicker at the kicker position. So he should be back. They have their punter who was an Australian. He's currently serving as a GA with the team. He graduated, but Cade back. I'm not too I'm not too familiar with the backup punters, but he's a guy that has been in the program a long time. He's been there a while. I think this is his 4th year with the program, so he should slip in. I know they have a couple of transfers when it comes to long snapper and punter and kicker. Colin Westfeldt's a guy that's going to continue to be a presence at long snapper. I assume he's been the long snapper there for 2 seasons. I think this was the 2nd season, but as special teams, he'll be there for that. I think at kick returner, it's going to be interesting just because I know Rich Rod didn't return a lot of kicks, but Michael Petway will step in at kick returner and punt returner. Maybe there's another guy that comes in, but I'm sure he'll be the primary one for Jacksonville State just because, he was an all-conference pick at kick returner a few years ago, so he could certainly be that for Jacksonville State, and I know that he's excited to return some kicks this year. But the special teams unit honestly looks pretty solid as far as returning production and, kind of what's coming in for Jacksonville State.
Well, now that spring practice is over, which position group or groups do you think is the most concerning heading into 2025?
It's interesting. That's a good question. I do think that the defense has a lot of questions just because of like we've said 100 times, just the portal, coaching chain, and players following Rich Rod or going other places, what have you. But it'll be interesting to see how the linebacker room, I think, responds. They lost a lot of really good talent, and I do kind of want to see how the defensive backs fare against real life competition next season. There's a lot of talent, I think, on that in that room, as far as these are guys that had success at one level or they just haven't been able to find success, but they are 4-star guys that were out of high school and just haven't been able to find a place for whatever reason it is. But there's a lot of really good players, I think, in that defensive back room, but it'll just be interesting to see how they mesh when it comes to real life competition and against some, Conference USA opponents. But I think those two would kind of be the ones that I would look to as far as who's going to step up, who's going to be lining up, and, who's going to make an impact.
In today's age of NIL, revenue sharing, the transfer portal, how has it changed Jacksonville State recruiting philosophy? Like, I know you mentioned Coach Kelly's in there with a high school. Is he getting most of the kids from high school, or are they kind of recruiting more D2 JUCO? I know the coaching staff hasn't been there too long, but what have you seen in their short time there?
Yeah, if you know Coach Kelly, you know that he's a really good recruiter. People just like this guy. They want to play for him. They're happy to play for him. And you look at some of these guys and you're like, man, they got some dudes. Like Gavin Wimsatt's a guy that I'm sure had some other opportunities and picked Jacksonville State. Traquan Fagans is a guy that may have had other opportunities in the portal, picked Jacksonville State. There are guys, Cam Cook, I think, is another example, probably had other opportunities, picked Jacksonville State out of the transfer portal. I think that Coach Kelly's philosophy is obviously he wants, a team full of high school guys, but which would be cool, but that's just kind of not how it is nowadays. If you get a guy and, he's really good for a year and goes somewhere else, that's good. That's a success for a group of 5 program, just because obviously not for the fans or the production, but it's good that guys are getting opportunities because people say, oh, I saw this guy that went to, Georgia, and I want to be able to have that. I want to be able to get in that room and be able to have a season like that and go get my money in the SEC. But he's really good at being able to plug those holes. And obviously there were a lot. I think this season might be an outlier when it comes to getting guys to Jacksonville State, just because there were not a lot of scholarship players on that roster when he got here. In fact, a red flag amount, like, oh crap, we got to do stuff. But I think that he is really good at landing guys, and but I do think that he's really good at just grassroots recruiting. I mean, his staff is really familiar with the state of Alabama. They have a lot of familiarity with the state, whether it be South Alabama or, just like the Dothan area or by the beach or what have you. I mean, there's a lot of guys who have a lot of familiarity with the state, and a lot of people know who they are in the state. So that certainly helps when it comes to recruiting. And I think that'll be an edge specifically in the state of Alabama for Kelly.
Do you think, given that the P4 seems to really go after transfer portal guys, that it's giving Jacksonville State access to maybe a higher level of recruit than they've had in the past?
We actually talked about this with Coach Kelly the other day. Like you said, it's never been harder for a really good high school player to find a spot, just because if you're doing anything, I mean, would you want a guy who's kind of fresh onto the scene and getting his feet wet and whatever it is? It doesn't even have to be college football. I mean, it can be business or, anything. Or would you rather have a guy who's been somewhere for a little while and is coming in and can say, hey, this is what I bring at college football level to your program? I mean, it's an easy pick, and that's how it is nowadays with the transfer portal. You get access to those players, and scouts get do-overs almost in recruiting just because they're able to say, oh crap, we missed on that guy, but Jacksonville State or South Alabama or Troy didn't miss on that guy, but they had a good year there, let's get him. They're able to do that now. You get a do-over. But I do think that it does play a factor, and I think it's attractive to players that, the mindset is a little bit different now for Group of Fives. I think it's like, hey, you can go to Ole Miss if you want to, but you might not play. But if you come to Jacksonville State, you get 150 tackles. You get 20 interceptions because you're a really good player. Whatever it is, you can be there, and then you can go and get your real money, get a starting job wherever you want to go. It's the pitch is different for these Group of Five schools as far as it's changed from, hey, this is our school, this is great, and it's changed to kind of what opportunities can you provide me to be get to the next level. And that's how it is for some athletes who are at the high school level nowadays, just because of how tough it is to get a roster spot as a freshman.
Well, Thomas, heading into the 2025 season, what do you think the main strength of this team is?
I do think that it's the wide receivers. I think I like this group as both on and off the field. I mean, Michael Petway and Brock Ricksteiner are guys who have been in the system for a long time. DeAndre Johnson is a guy who will come in and be a factor. Some other names are AJ Watkins was a guy who transferred, who was at quarterback last year and is going to be part of the wide receiver room. I mean, they have guys that were in the system. I'm sure I'm forgetting some names, but they have guys that were in the system for a little while, and they can be some, they can kind of lead that group. But I think that's going to be a strength. I think the quarterback position has all the experience that they need to be successful. I do like Gavin Wimsatt a lot. I think that he may turn some heads this season for Jacksonville State. I think that he's certainly capable of doing that. But between those two, I think that they should have some success in the passing game. And I think Wimsatt's certainly a capable runner, like you said. So I do think that the wide receivers will definitely benefit both the offense, and the quarterback as a whole and the quarterback this season, just because of their experience.
Well, coming off a Conference USA championship, a brand new coaching staff, a lot of new faces. What does success look like for the Gamecocks here in 2025?
I think that a lot of these players are coming in with, but a lot of these players are coming with the expectation of let's go back to back. I mean, some of these players saw what Jacksonville State is capable of, and this isn't a school that has a huge budget. I mean, this is a school that's done a lot with not much. And I think that's a big credit to the athletic director, Greg Seitz. But I mean, they finished second. They played in the championship game or finished second. And, you look at baseball and softball and men's basketball and women's golf and, bowling won a national championship last year. I mean, they're doing a lot with not a lot when you look at the grand scheme of these are the Division I athletics departments with FBS schools or football teams that have, these are the budgets. Jacksonville State's definitely on the end of that. So they're doing a lot with not a lot. And Jacksonville State people appreciate that, but I think that the recruits can see that there is success there. So obviously it's a duh that they want to go back to back, but I think that the expectations of the players are competing, being consistent in Conference USA, being able to, get back to the top. And, Conference USA, I think that they certainly can do that. Excuse me. I do certainly think they're capable of that in Conference USA just because of the way the league is. And, we'll see what happens. But the expectations are strong and they're high in that locker room for sure.
If you look at their schedule, is there a stretch of games that you feel is kind of the most crucial for their success this season?
I mean, the first few games of the season are going to be really tough for them, I think, and a really good kind of let's get these out of the way. I mean, UCF to start the season under a first-year head coach on a Thursday night, and then you open Conference USA play with Liberty on that Saturday a few days later, and then you have your non-conference games. But the Conference USA stretch just isn't really that good when it comes to, these are really, really good teams. I mean, they have the stretch where it's, Middle Tennessee, UTEP, Kennesaw State, and FIU all on 4 straight weeks, and those just aren't really that good of teams. So the latter part of their season should be a little bit easier for them, a lot easier for them as opposed to maybe the first stretch of the season. But they close the season with Western Kentucky, and I think that when you get to that point of the season, they'll be able to identify what's next for them, who's going to be competing for the championship, just because this is the last game of the season for them. Obviously they'll be able to know who's competing, but that'll kind of give them a chance to, the Liberty game specifically will give them a chance to kind of evaluate where they're at. I mean, that's a team that they beat on the road last year, 27-17, I think was the score. So they beat them and, have familiarity with that team. And I don't know too much about Liberty, but we'll see how that early game goes. I think that it's certainly an interesting game that I think could probably, that a lot of people should watch just because it's going to be some pretty good Group of 5 football.
Well, Thomas, we've covered this roster from top to bottom, offense, defense, special teams. Is there anything else that you want to share or think that we should know about this 2025 Jacksonville State football team?
I mean, I think people are just excited about Coach Kelly. I mean, this is a guy that's, come in. He's just been friendly. I think he's been, he's been doing grassroots. He's showed up to the basketball games. He showed up to just kind of whatever he can. I mean, I've been told that you just see him around campus a lot. I mean, he uses the dry cleaners down the street. I mean, he eats at the cafeteria that all the students eat at. And, he's just a guy that people just like to be around him and enjoy that he's actually taking at least what seems like, initiative in putting Jacksonville State's face out there. And I do think that the staff does a really good job of, utilizing the state. I think that every single high school coach that I've talked to about Coach Kelly and the staff that they have there are just like, man, this guy's awesome. He actually cares about our players. And I think what Coach Kelly's said before is just, if they're going to go to those high schools that maybe they don't have guys who are going to go to Jacksonville State, but they just want those relationships so that maybe one day, when they do have a guy that'll go to Jacksonville State, then that's who they're going to pick. But he's just a genuinely good person. I think that he genuinely cares about his players. And I think people are honestly excited that they have a coach that they feel like is a part of their culture and a part of their program. So people are excited about Coach Kelly and his staff specifically, I think, in Calhoun County.
Well, Thomas, we want to thank you for taking some time out of your day to spend with us and share your knowledge. We greatly appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you guys.
All right. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. Until the next time, we are the G55.